think there's certainly an issue of tax credits for taking on new employees, as we've discussed. In fact, the Minister in his budget speech flagged that is something that is being looked at. My own personal view is that I think I can see it to be quite difficult to implement. And at the end of the day, the bigger issue from my perspective is that we need to get people to a state where they're ready to be employed, and that because one of the challenges that we face as an employer is finding, even in this market where there's substantial unemployment, is to find the right people for the jobs that are available. So I think I would rather, I'm not against tax credits for new employees. I think it's something we can look at. Or indeed, for example, in specific sectors, a good example is the ICT sector, where in order for our ICT sector, the call centres, to compete internationally, the industry has been saying that they need some kind of incentive because other jurisdictions to attract call centres have either a tax credit per seat or a grant per head employed. So there are going to be instances where we need to develop some kind of mechanism to compete internationally. But on a wholesale basis, I think we need to be careful, and I would rather prioritise the money in spending it on getting people to ensure that they're actually ready to be employed and they have the necessary skill sets to be employed.
Mr. Roberts, thank you, Brian. Should there be more incentives to the hiring of labour?
Yes, absolutely. And I think Brian here inspiration. Certainly, we have to find a way to get something that.
All right, thank you very much. Something that Brian spoke to in his opening remarks regarding the overall structure that has been outlined. It's a fairly ambitious tax reform program, by the way, and there are clear implementation risks, given our history in Jamaica. What I would like to hear, Mr. Matalon, what are some of the things that we can do to manage the implementation risks of the tax reform agenda?
Okay, well, your key risk, so far as I'm concerned, two really. First of all, I think that the public needs to be made sufficiently aware and be sufficiently educated as to the underlying issues that are going to drive the decisions that we make. We have recommended that any comprehensive reform program that the government intends on implementing, and this Danny was a part of the consultation that we talk about. We recommended that they not make an attempt to institute comprehensive reform in this current budget, simply because of the time constraints that were faced in doing so. But we instead suggested that, as a departure from the past, where nobody in government wants to speak to you about tax reform in May, June, July, August, and then are suddenly very anxious to talk to you about it in March or April, when it's too late to really do anything that is well thought through. That the work needs to start now, immediately post this budget debate, in doing the analysis of the various reform measures, coming up with a menu of reform options that is then published by way perhaps of a green paper, as Brian Denning has suggested, that can be disseminated not only to the Parliament but publicly, where the issues can be discussed so that a general consensus can be derived around the tax reform measures that are necessary. That to me, Brian talked about a favorite quotation of mine about plucking goose. And the real advantage we have is that we are not geese, and in fact we are thinking persons. And I think to the extent that we can provide the public education and awareness then the acceptance of a particular tax reform package and therefore its success can be guaranteed. And that is really the critical issue. Brian talked about the political will, and the other issue to my mind is the public awareness and education.
I could also just come in, and one of the risks that I have seen, of course, given our very delicate fiscal situation, government is undoubtedly very concerned that any measure that is introduced does not reduce the revenue to the consolidated fund. And therefore, one of the challenges with implementing this comprehensive reform, and how do you do it, is the risk that you don't at least maintain your revenues, and as you rebalance your tax system. And Minister Shaw in his budget speech did acknowledge that the government is looking at implementing comprehensive reform on a phased basis. So it's in a sense a little bit of a steady as she goes. You implement one part, and over time it's less dramatic and traumatic to the system. So in addition to that, another thing is very important is the economic modelling. Get the economic modelling right for the measures, so we know we get its best estimate as to how it's going to affect.
Thank you. An issue that I want to move to as we wait for our Facebook question is the issue of compliance and custodial sentences for tax, not just tax treat. Mr. Matalon spoke to custodial sentences as something that he would be lobbying for.
It's in the economic policy framework.
Right, but what has been the response of government to custodial sentences?
So far, I don't think that there are any moves in that direction. But it just strikes me with all the talk that we have had over the last 25 years that I've been working in Jamaica about compliance. In that time, I have not heard of a single individual who has actually gone to prison as a result of defrauding the tax administration. Yes, we have to make changes to the system to make it easier to comply. But at the same time, I think all Jamaicans need to recognize that it is their responsibility to shoulder a part of the burden for those public goods that are due by government. And in cases where you defraud the tax administration, that is no different from going into a shop and shoplifting, or from holding up a bank and stealing money. It's a crime, and it's a crime that ought to be punished in the same way as similar other such crimes are punished.
Thank you. Comment on that, Dominic?
Well, certainly supporting what's part of the situation of activities and opposed. Certainly, clear. Who are defrauding the tax system.
It was also mentioned that in a small society such as Jamaica, another mechanism that has been used effectively in other jurisdictions has been the name and shame approach, where tax defaulters are being and so on are published. Obviously, one has to be careful that there's a certain process that you have to go through so the tax liabilities are established, the capital matters that are in dispute. But that has proved to be very effective. It's something that has been suggested. It's another area, separate and apart from the custodial, but it's something that we should.
All right, thank you. Let me ask a somewhat controversial question as it relates to the sin taxes. Now, evidence from the UK, Canada, shows that a removal or reductions in the rates on these items, cigarettes, alcohol, and so on, over time, tended to reduce the smuggling and increase overall revenues. Is that something that you would support, Mr.
first class, my friend. I don't drink the stuff myself, so
No smoke.
not true, Brad.
Nice one, Joe. Well, you know, people will be familiar with the concept of the law of diminishing returns, and when you tax something to such a point, if you impose such taxation, you will actually reduce the number of taxes you collect. And I guess we need to decide as a society whether we are looking to generate taxation from these products. If that's our primary goal, or we're primarily trying to influence the behavior of society in terms of consumption of alcohol, cigarettes, and so on. So I think it's really a policy issue to decide what is our priority. Are we looking to maximize taxation, or are we looking to influence behavior? And I think that will ultimately drive that taxation policy.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take one final question from Mr. Brian Simpson. The question is it possible to merge Guard Simpson, the moral and immoral tax system through an equitable, moral economy, through an equitable tax system, right? And I'm going to ask Mr. Dennin, and we're going to move to Mr. Matalon, and we round over Ms. Schnoor and Dr. Roberts.
When we say the moral and immoral, we're talking about formal or informal?
Yes, I think
because it could have a different context. And I'm not sure how we would tax that part of the economy. You know, the truth is that this informal economy that we speak of, it doesn't exist independently of the formal economy. It's entirely wrapped up, and it's in very, to some degree, some people are more outside of the formal economy than others. And so sometimes when we say about bringing the informal economy in, even those who are not paying their income taxes, when they're incurring their expenses, they are being subjected, unless they shop exclusively with people who are not registered for GCT. They're paying some level of taxes, and they're paying some level of taxes in accordance. But I think the key issue is that when you reduce tax rates, you reduce the incentive to evade the taxes. And therefore, as long as we have the high tax rates, we encourage people to be more into the informal economy. And maybe there's certain activities that they're engaged in. And therefore, by bringing down the rates, lowering the rates, broadening the base, is a key way of trying to merge that formal and informal economy. So that people are, and also by toughening up in terms of administration, it actually makes it, when you make it more difficult, if people are operating in the informal economy, you will help them make the decision to say it's easier to pay my lower rate of taxes in the formal economy to try and work outside the economy. And it's really a carrot and stick approach.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move to a question that just came across the screen here from one of our Facebook viewers, Ian Chan. And it speaks to the issue of bankruptcy legislation. I'm not sure if I could, our production system can bring it up here. But essentially what he's saying is that the bankruptcy legislation, or lack of a suitable bankruptcy law, precludes businesses or entrepreneurial spirit. And Mr. Matalon, as one of the major authors of the 2020 report, I would like you to give your views on that.
The 2004 committee wasn't actually asked to look at bankruptcy, but it is an issue that has exercised the minds of many of us within the PSOJ. In fact, there is within the section of the economic policy framework that deals with creating an enabling business environment, a recommendation that government reforms bankruptcy law as a part of creating that more enabling environment. And in fact, very recently, we have put together an ad hoc committee within the PSOJ that will ultimately speak to specific proposals that will be made for the reform of the bankruptcy laws. And I think that that is a very, very necessary